backstage at the famous New York City jazz club, the Jazz Standard, and I thought, what better place to record a video about why we learn jazz standards? Now, I'm addressing this video to people who are already learning some jazz standards to maybe crystallize some ideas about why we're doing it, and also to talk to some people who have maybe decided that maybe it's not necessary to learn jazz standards, and to maybe convince a few people that it's a very useful thing to do. Now, just to be clear, when I use the word jazz standard, I'm talking about sort of two groups of music. One is referred to as the Great American Songbook, which is popular music from the golden age of Hollywood and Broadway musicals, most of them written between, say, 1920 and the 1960s, and also sort of a group of jazz standards that were written by great jazz musicians and have entered the canon and the lexicon of tunes that we play. I'd like to point out that even if you're not planning on playing jazz standards as part of your improvising career, that you'll only be playing original music, there's still a lot to be learned and gleaned from studying jazz standards. I'd like to start talking about melody. You can learn a lot about melody and about developing your phrasing from the jazz standards. Most of them are pretty singable melodies, and when you study them, you can notice many composer techniques such as inversion, repetition, motivic development, rhythmic displacement. All of the sort of things that composers tend to use in all music are found in the songbook and in jazz standards. Perhaps the most important way that the songbook songs have affected jazz is through their harmony. If you study jazz standards, you'll discover a very rich and diverse use of harmony, probably more rich and diverse than in many of the other musics that you may study or hear around. And if you learn to navigate that harmony, it certainly will improve your improvising in any other sort of harmony and give you a sense of how things go away and come back to a home base, different ways to get from one place to another harmonically. It's definitely a very useful thing you can get out of studying jazz standards. Another important thing we learn when we're studying jazz standards is learning about form in music. The songbook songs have a variety of forms, although the most common one is a 32-bar form. And when you study the standards, you get a feeling of how composers use form, how they go away and come home in form, how they use repetition within the form. And all of those things can inform both your improvising and your composing. Now, everything I've talked about so far occurs in many types of music, of course. Melody, harmony, form, those are parts of music in general. But they occur in a specific way among jazz standards. And by studying them, you can really improve your hearing and your inner hearing and improve your improvisation that way. Because it's just complex enough. The harmonies just complex enough to challenge you, but be grounded. The melodies, they're singable, but they can have certain complexities to them. Same thing with the form. These are the sorts of things that, as you're studying them, can impact your playing. My next point has more to do with actually playing jazz standards, I guess, than necessarily just studying them. But this is an important one to me. The thing about jazz standards is that because they have a hearable direction, that the harmony has tension and release, that the form goes somewhere and comes back, there's an already built-in sense of resolution. And that allows actually for more freedom from the improviser. It allows the improviser to play really free things and still have a sense of going somewhere and coming back that's kind of already built in. That wouldn't necessarily be there in a more simple harmonic setting or in a more simple formal setting. And this is one that's maybe often under-discussed or something. It's really one of the things I love most about playing standards is how much freedom I have to kind of play anything I want, even though it seems like it's within a structure or I'm more restricted. I actually feel less restricted playing jazz standards than I do some other things. I'll give you two examples of what I mean. Sometimes I play music that's very dense harmonically and has a lot of sort of unexpected harmonic twists. And I find when I'm playing that music, I'm forced more or less to play the harmony, or else it seems like I'm not really playing the song. And so that gives me actually a little bit of less freedom than I would on a piece that has, say, a 3-6-2-5 progression, or it's doing a backdoor 2-5 back to 1. I can do a lot of different things on top of that. And then on the other hand, I play some music that's 1 or 2 chords on a short form, like a 4-bar or 8-bar repeated form. And that, of course, comes with a certain kind of freedom. Definitely, you can do a lot of things. You're not in a box harmonically at all. But on the other hand, you have to create a lot more of the tension and release yourself, which actually forces you to, if you're going to be compelling, it forces you to do more, where the tension and release is already built in the jazz standard. My next point might not be relevant to people who never want to play standards, who don't want to have anything to do with that part of the jazz world, and that's okay. But one of the things that standards do is that they allow you to communicate with other jazz musicians instantly. When you're playing a song that everyone knows, you have the ability to play with other people, to go to a jam session, to play anywhere in the world, and be able to make music immediately with people with very little discussion. That, to me, is a huge advantage. And one of the things jazz fans and people who like jazz around the world really love about jazz, that people can meet and play together for the first time, having never played together, and make something real happen. Now, most of what I've talked about so far applies to both the songbook songs and the more jazz standards from the jazz masters. But there's something that really specific to the jazz masters music is the rhythmic language. And studying those really gives you an insight into the rhythmic language of jazz in general, both small form rhythm and then bigger picture phrasing. And when you study jazz standards written by the jazz masters, you really get a glimpse into their individual minds and their vocabulary. And also it gives you an idea of different ways that you can get around making this kind of music, making jazz music, both harmonically, melodically, and especially rhythmically. Just to give an example of that, you take the music of, say, Charlie Parker, which is very specific rhythmically and melodically, and you compare it to, say, the music of Ornette Coleman. They're fairly different, but they maintain some really similar elements, and I think studying that can really give you a clue as to what jazz is and why something sounds like jazz and something maybe doesn't. You can do the same thing with a wide variety of the great composers. For instance, take some of the hits of Ellington and contrast them with Wayne Shorter. Or where does Thelonious Monk fit in all of this stuff? I really think that studying these masters' compositions, even if you're never going to play them, will really reveal a lot about this music and will certainly inform both your improvising and your composing. The bottom line I'd like to make is that studying and assimilating the music of past masters, both the jazz masters and of the great songwriters, is an important first step in creating your own artistic voice. So the idea isn't necessarily to write just like them or to play just like the other players who played this music, but certainly there's a great value to be had in studying that music and assimilating it yourself in whatever way you want to make your music. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to what I had to say about jazz standards, and I hope to see you again soon.